My guest today is a multi-talented kind of plant-powered superstar. She is an author. She is a research fellow at King's College in London. She's got the Gut Health Clinic. You may have read her book, Love Your Gut. She's got a new one coming out as well called How to Eat More Plants. And if anybody ever needed direction on anything, this is the direction to take. This is so fantastic. I'm so excited to have Dr. Megan Rossi here with us. Thank you so very much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure.
How are things going with you? I know we have a mutual friend in Will Bolsowitz, and when he just released the Fiber Fueled Cookbook, it was a whirlwind of appearances and Instagram lives and just commitments to get this book on store shelves and get that in front of people. How are you dealing with this? Because I'm sure your plate is ultra full right now.
Yeah, look, it's a lot, but I love it. You know, when you've got a message that you know can improve people's lives in very real and often surprising ways, it just keeps, spurring you on to do the TV and do the lives and do the podcasts because I know that, it has the potential to help millions of people. So it's that motivation that continues to get me through with not that much sleep, which my gut microbes aren't overly happy with.
Can gut microbes be affected by sleep? We always think about what it is that you're eating, but sleep plays a role there too, huh?
Absolutely. So we know that like humans, we've got our own circadian rhythm. So do our gut microbes. So that's the sleep-wake cycle. And the studies have shown that after just 2 days of not getting enough sleep, so sleep deprivation, actually it changes your gut microbes despite being on the same diet. So that's actually something I focus on in the first book, Love Your Gut, the 4 pillars of gut health. So yes, obviously we know diet's really important, but so is getting enough sleep. So I've got a sleeper questionnaire in the first book which helps you get an idea of your sleep quality. And then I get one of my researchers actually at King's College in London shared with me this sleep protocol that she actually used in a clinical trial that showed it significantly improved people's sleep quality and duration compared to the other control group that just got told to sleep more. So she let me put that in the book to help people really, maximize their sleep and in turn improve their gut health that way. Then obviously there is the movement element. We know that's equally important as you sleep in terms of supporting that gut bacterial community and really helping them thrive. And then also there's stress. That's the 4th pillar. We know that so many of us, myself included at times, can get stressed. And that strangulation up here leads to strangulation of your gut, and your gut microbes don't like that either. So again, in Love Your Gut, I've got a stress questionnaire where you can scale yourself, as well as one of my colleagues, Kimberly Wilson, who's a psychologist, actually shared some of her favorite types of, 10-minute strategies to help reduce stress and in turn calm down the gut there. So yeah, it's all about those 4 elements. Despite, people having a perfect gut boosting diet, if you're not focusing on the other areas, you just can't really get optimal gut health.
Ooh, okay. So I'm learning something new today. All right. So I definitely could use some help with the sleep and stress. That's interesting. I'm gonna follow those tips. I'm gonna get me a good night's sleep. Was not really expecting to talk about that at the top of the interview, but here we are. Let's talk about nutrition though, and focus on that. That is the primary focus of the exam room. After all, the exam room is all about diet. They love to learn about this stuff. Now, in your book, How to Eat More Plants, okay, you encourage people to eat 30 or more plants every single week. You hear the number 30. Initially, that seems like an awful lot, but your message in the book is you can get to 30 without much effort at all.
It really is much easier than what people think. In fact, the menu plans in the book, whether it's the one for family feasting or for busy people, all of them contain over 70 plant points each and every week. Now, the important thing to highlight, it doesn't take extra time or extra cost. I want to make sure that this is a really accessible way to achieve maximum gut health. It's things like, at the grocery store, instead of just getting the pumpkin seeds, get the 3 seed mix. Instead of just getting your chickpeas, you get the 3 bean mix, as long as it's obviously not in salt or vinegar, it's just in the water. And those sorts of things. Instead of just broccoli, get the stir fry mix. So whenever you go to the store, think diversity. Now, this magic number 30 stemmed from a trial undertaken in the US from, some amazing colleagues of mine. And they showed that, yes, people who eat at least 30 different types of plants a week have better gut health than those who eat the same 10 on repeat. And I think if we think about our own diets, often we do fall into habitual buying the same foods, cooking the same meals. But the science is really highlighting this element of diversity is incredibly important because of these phytochemicals. So we know that we all, need, the key micronutrients in our diet. There's about 20 plus of them, but there is tens of thousands of these phytochemicals which are within plants. And each different type of plant provides different phytochemicals. Now, the thing about these phytochemicals is that our bacteria absolutely love them. And when we feed our body these phytochemicals, the bacteria thrive. They're better at producing different vitamins, regulating hormones, communicating with our brain, impacting our blood sugar regulation. All of those things our bacteria do are enhanced when we feed them that diversity of those phytochemicals. So that's the science behind why we're trying to get at least 30. And in the book, I've come up with this plant point system, which stemmed from that trial showing about the 30. But then I've just added on some of my clinical experience in terms of, giving different. So for example, herbs and spices just get a quarter of a point. But if you eat, an example, if you eat 20 strawberries, you only get 1 point. Whereas if you eat 10 strawberries and a banana and some quinoa, you get 3 points. So each different type, you get a new point.
Ooh, so you've kind of turned it into a game. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, look, the reason I did that is because, I've been a clinician for the past 15 years. I know that we love counting things. But what we see is counting things like calories just doesn't achieve the long-term results that people deserve. So I've kind of turned it into a way we can count plants instead. And it's a really fun way, I think, to engage with the, thousands of different plant species out there that a lot of us, may have seen in the shops, but aren't that comfortable with cooking, for example. So, one of the sections in the book is the meat, the legumes, and then meat, the whole grains. And what I've done is introduced 8 really, incredibly healthy types of whole grains and legumes, which are available from most mainstream supermarkets. You don't need to go to these expensive health food stores. So you can get them accessibly, but I tell you, what dishes you can switch them in for, what are the key nutrients in them, what do they taste like? So you feel a little bit more comfortable with exploring these types of different legumes and whole grains that you might not have had on your menu very regularly.
I'm sitting here and I'm visualizing the foods that you're naming. You just rattled off the fruits. So you said banana, that's yellow, strawberry, that's red, kiwi, that's green. Then you've got the beans and the legumes and the grains, so like brown and black, and that maybe red. So it sounds to me like you're kind of describing also the importance of eating the rainbow, as we say. So are you of the mindset like you have to have a lot of different colors on your plate to make sure that you're getting everything?
Yeah, look, I'm all for the rainbow, but I take it probably one step further. And I recommend that people have something from each of the 6 plant-based food groups in their diet most days, if not all days. And I call them the Super Six. So you've got your whole grains, your nuts and seeds, your fruit, your veg, your legumes, and your herbs and your spices. Now, each different category actually provides your gut bacteria and therefore your body with different types of phytochemicals. And that's why we see some of these diets where, for example, keto and paleo, where they're cutting out one of these beneficial plant-based food groups, the science has shown actually reduces down some of their beneficial gut bacteria because each bacteria, just like us, has different taste preferences. So if we're feeding our gut bacteria just all veg and aren't getting any legumes in, then we don't get to grow the legume-loving microbes, i.e. bacteria, that we know can do an array of things to benefit our body. So that's, my goal for people is to think across the day, have I gotten something from each of the Super Six? And if they haven't, you might think about, some ways to sneak them in. In the book, I've got, plenty of recipes, 80 plus recipes. And I talk about things like, in a smoothie, put in some frozen cauliflower. It actually blends and makes it so creamy and you can't even taste the cauliflower. So if you've got someone who's not that into plants and you want to slowly change their taste buds, which is actually a science-backed thing because we've got microbes in our mouth and they start to adapt and help us crave plants the more we eat, doing things like that can really help get the whole family on board eating more plants.
That's awesome. I love sneaking plant foods in for people who aren't vegan and certainly are kind of eating that standard Western diet. For example, they love certain members of my family love this chocolate shake that I make, but they don't know that I put black beans in the chocolate
Love
shake. They
that.
just think it's great, right? Like, are you going to go to McDonald's, order a chocolate shake, and get black beans in that? Doubt it.
I know. I love that you do that because I'm so passionate about that. Where, a lot of people, just get turned off if it's a legume or if it's a plant. They're like, oh, yuck, I don't like it. And they don't let themselves enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? Because psychologically, they've been taught that it's a yucky thing, often from childhood.
Yeah.
But plants can taste absolutely amazing. And if you think about animal foods, anything can taste bad if it's not cooked right. Like a steak, if it's burnt the hell out and all gross, like people who love meat won't like that. The same with veg. I think we just haven't really been taught how to cook the foundations and make veg taste delicious. And again, hopefully that's what people can get from how to eat more plants.
And we're talking about getting to 30 plants per week. Do you have an idea on average what the standard person is eating in terms of the volume of plants?
Yeah, look, it's probably around 10.
Wow.
Certainly what I see, from clinic. So yeah, there's a lot, a lot we can do. And it's like I said, just small little tweaks. So hopefully it's something very achievable for everyone. And, I do have these resources in the book that people print out and put on their fridge. And it gets me so excited when I see people completing them, particularly with kids, where they start, tallying the super six and count up how many plants they've had across the week and set themselves a little goal and go, okay, next week I'm going to add an extra 1 or 2 plants on. And that sort of setting yourself those goals and targets can really help people achieve the goal. And after about 4 weeks, people report feeling and even looking so much better.
All right. So 4 weeks, that's when they start to feel it. But how quickly internally do those benefits start to kick in? I would imagine it's sooner than that, even.
Absolutely. So we know from the David paper that actually our microbes can change within 2 or so days from how we feed. If we go from extreme diet, so that the study showed from meat only diet to plants only, and they showed 2 days their microbes started to change. But of course, that's just small changes. We see more advanced changes on things like the chemicals that the bacteria are producing, and the actual change in the whole profile probably does take a few more weeks than that to kick in.
So you just mentioned the word chemicals, and that makes me think of this study that was just released not too terribly long ago. Showed that when you eat red meat, the gut microbes produce these chemicals that increase the risk for heart disease. I believe it's like 22% per serving per day. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary connection there, and a pretty high increase there for every piece of red meat. Um, how does the body break that down differently, the red meat versus plants? Like, is the digestive process different, or is it just you are producing different chemicals? Well, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. And, just to add to that, I think it was, the World Health Organization 2015 actually did say that processed meats are a carcinogen, i.e. cancer causing. Like they've made that as a ruling. And just recently, the French government have reviewed that. And also support that. So in all of their, guidelines, they're trying to reduce down a lot of these processed meats. But in terms of red meat, so yeah, this is a really good point. So in terms of what's in it, it's protein, essentially these animal types of protein. We also know, obviously, there's plant protein as well. So when we think about our gut, it's 9-meter long digestive tube, essentially, and there's 4 parts to it. We've got our food pipe, i.e. our esophagus. We've got our stomach, which is like a washing machine, chucks the food around, cleans it with detergents and acids. And then once it gets to like a puree consistency, it makes its way to the third part of the intestine called the small intestine, which is a weird name because it's like 6 meters long. So certainly not small by size. But in the small intestine is where most of the nutrients, i.e. the proteins, get broken down into these things called amino acids, which is the building blocks, and gets from our gut into the blood system. And then that gets to feed our muscles, our skin, our hair, etc. So And then, sorry, the fourth and final part is the large intestine. So that is where we have those trillions of gut bacteria. Now, anything in the small intestine that doesn't get digested makes its way into the large intestine, and the bacteria ferment it. Now, we know the thing about plants is it's full of fiber. Now, fiber, actually humans can't digest. We don't have the enzymes to digest it. So it travels through the small intestine undigested and makes its way to the final part where the bacteria uniquely have the enzymes to break down that fiber and in turn produce a range of beneficial chemicals. Now, the thing about red meat is that when we eat red meat, often actually we malabsorb a little bit of it. So it doesn't all get absorbed in that small intestine. It makes its way to the large intestine. And when the bacteria are faced with animal protein, they ferment it in a way that produces some potentially toxic metabolites like trimethylamine oxide, another chemical that's been associated as a risk factor for cardio heart disease. So what we're seeing is that when bacteria ferment the animal protein, they're producing kind of negative profiles of chemicals, but also promote the growth of some potentially troublesome bacteria. Compared when the bacteria eat the fiber, they produce beneficial chemicals and it supports the growth of anti-inflammatory types of bacteria. So in terms of, I guess, the mechanism of red meat, a lot of it comes down to the bacteria producing potentially negative compounds. And there's also some research looking at the heme iron, so the meat iron. Again, as some of that gets malabsorbed and the bacteria do negative things with that heme iron as well. And we think produce some of these potentially carcinogenic compounds. So yeah, it really is a fascinating area. In fact, in my PhD, we looked at things like the protein to fiber ratio and showed that increasing the amount of fiber reduced down the amount of protein fermentation that could occur, because when the bacteria are faced with both protein and fiber, they can always go the fiber, right? So if you can up the fiber, then that's going to reduce down that bacterial fermentation of the protein.
I had no idea that fiber wasn't really digested until it reached the large intestine. I love this show because you just learn something new every single day. Little things like that, they just blow my mind. Had no idea. Thank you.
That's why fiber is so beneficial. And I think, it's a new thing. I mean, we've known that people eat more fiber, always have lived longer, are happier, have better skin, better hormone control, etc. We never really understood the mechanism. We initially thought fiber just made you poop better and maybe that made you feel better, and that's why. But it's through the technology that's allowed us to understand the bacterial component of our body, where we've discovered that actually, we don't digest the fiber. We don't have the enzymes. It's the bacteria, and they produce these things called short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which strengthen the gut lining, and other types of organic acids, which some of them can pass that blood-brain barrier and impact things like our mental health. So yeah, it really is, I guess, this new understanding of why plants are beneficial, that mechanism that's been missing. And I'm so passionate about people understanding that mechanism, because it kind of makes plants sexy again, right? People go, oh, instead of the government just slamming down, eat more plants, eat more fiber. When you understand the mechanism, I think people are more likely to jump on board it and be like, oh yeah, now I get why I'm doing this. And the more you start to include it, then your taste buds change and then you're really on board with this way of eating.
You are super passionate about it. Like, you can't hide that passion. Like when you were a little girl, right? So like little 5-year-old, 6-year-old Megan, like were you, you know, envisioning like getting so giddy over the digestive process? Did you always want to go this route?
Yeah, look, I mean, I actually grew up in a farm in Australia, a very small town. So you may have picked up I'm Australian, actually. After finishing my PhD at the University of Queensland, I moved over to work as a research fellow at King's because they were doing really impressive gut health research. So yeah, I've come from a very small, town farm lifestyle where good gut health was inherent to my upbringing, eating fresh fruit and veg, playing in the dirt, all that sort of stuff. But certainly didn't think that I would ever be into gut health. And it wasn't until actually I was in my final year studying nutrition and dietetics, and I lost my grandma to bowel cancer. And that was my first actual conscious encounter of the gut. So it was quite a negative one. I hated the gut. I was like, because my grandma had a big part of my upbringing, I was like, God, like, how could you have done this, like, through the chemo, the surgery, all that sort of stuff, and obviously taking her life. But then I started working in the hospital setting with people who had either, different types of cancers, kidney disease, mental health issues, but also I was very fortunate to be the nutritionist for the Australian Olympic synchronized swimming team, and found that the girls with the most performance anxiety also had the most number of gut issues. So these two worlds are very different, people. I was seeing, God, everyone was being affected by the gut, and this organ was haunting me. So that's when I decided to embark on a PhD, because I was like, I wanna understand it more. I owe it to my grandma and to my patients and clients. And it was really that PhD that transformed everything. It was like, okay, so the gut is actually hugely powerful. It's just misunderstood. And I can improve people's lives in very real and often surprising ways by targeting the gut. And that's when I knew the rest of my career I wanted to dedicate to gut health.
So this is a personal thing for you, like that makes you all the more passionate, I would think. And again, like it's not just passion, that passion breeds excitement. And it sounds to me like you love research so much that you're always curious, and you have this insatiable appetite, this thirst for knowledge, that you just love keep learning and learning and learning. That's kind of the vibe that you're giving off. Is that right?
I mean, absolutely. I think I had an inquisitive mindset from day dot. My mum was a science teacher. I was always asking. I was always that annoying person in class. I was like, but why? Why is that? And I find it so exciting when you can understand how you can make yourself feel better, live longer, and be happier. And I just see so many people, in clinic, on social media, who are struggling so much. And I know if we can get this message to them, it can transform their lives. Like, I get so many really special and amazing messages from people who've read the books, or I've seen in clinic, and they're like, life will never be the same. This is game change. And I just, I get such a buzz from that I just want to, like, share it with everyone, try everyone to kind of make them help themselves, empower them essentially, and inspire them to feel better.
You know what I've learned doing this show and interviewing you and Dr. Will Bolsowitz and other gastroenterologists is just how powerful that connection is between the gut and virtually like every other part of the body, but specifically the brain also, right? So that gut-brain connection is really, really, really super strong. And I know that that's also something that you've talked about in the past and in this book. Like, talk to us about that connection, and even to the extent like how somebody with a healthier gut microbiome there, a healthier gut, is less likely to have something like depression and anxiety. I believe I've seen studies there as well.
Absolutely. And, that's something that I was really passionate about getting into how to eat more plants is, yes, it's got all the recipes and the practical elements of it, but I talk about, these 5 different axes. So the gut brain axis, the gut skin axis, the gut hormone axis, the gut metabolism axis, and the gut immune axis. And this axis is just, the fancy word that describes that two-way communication that occurs, because the science is now so strong to highlight that our gut really can impact in a very strong and real way those 5 other elements. But like you highlighted, the gut brain axis is a really exciting one. So some of my colleagues actually in Australia did a landmark study called the SMILES trial. So anyone who's into the science may have heard of the SMILES trial before, but I talk about more in the book. And for me, it was the first time where I actually, because obviously in clinic I saw quite impressive results by targeting people's diet on their mental health. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, people coming off antidepressants and all that sort of stuff. But it was the first time where there was a robust clinical trial to back up what I was seeing in clinical practice, where they randomized people with moderate to severe depression. Half of them got this gut boosting diet. And, that's essentially, the diversity diet, which I talk about in the book. And the second one was this befriending type of counseling. Now, both groups followed the intervention for 12 weeks, either the diet or the counseling, and they came back and they reassessed their mental health using these questionnaires that we use in clinical practice. And what they found in the diet group, 32% of them had a significant improvement in their depression scores, which would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed, versus the control group, that was only 8%. And I just find that so striking that was just 12 weeks. And, 32% of them no longer classified as depressed.
Mm.
from those dietary changes. Now, it is really important that I do highlight that everyone in the trial in a very controlled way stayed on their antidepressant medications because they all had moderate severe, clinical depression. So if anyone's listening to this who does have depression, certainly don't just stop your medications, but I want you to feel empowered that by really trying to boost up the diversity of plants in your diet and nourishing your gut bacteria, you can really make a clinically relevant improvement in your mental health. And, mental health is very complex. So is depression. So not for everyone, but like studies like this highlight, and certainly what I see in clinic, some people, we can actually get them off the antidepressant medications with the support of their psychiatrist, if that's what they would like. And that's kind of what they're ready for when their gut health has that improvement.
I actually know about that firsthand. I was put on antidepressants when I was in the 6th or 7th grade and just woefully depressed, basically,
Yeah.
for many, many, many years. And I saw some very significant improvement once I began eating a plant-based diet. Even after, I had lost a lot of weight before going plant-based, like I still kind of suffered from that. And it wasn't even on my radar that there would be a connection between my diet and depression. But sure enough, there was market improvement there. And I'm not saying that it's perfect, just as you said, but compared to what it was, I mean, we are talking about, I would say, at least a 70% decline in depressive episodes, right? So it's just like I'm a happier individual, certainly healthier, and probably the old gut brain axis there had a lot to do with this, huh?
Absolutely. Well done to you. I mean, that's amazing. I love hearing these stories. Like it's so powerful to share them and so other people can really experience that. And, I do talk about case studies in the book so people can relate and know that actually real people are having these benefits, right? I will just add to plant-based, if you are 100% plant-based, I do recommend, particularly for your mental health, that people have an algae oil supplement, because we know that you can get omega-3 from animal sources like chia seeds, tofu, walnuts, etc. But it's the shorter chain omega-3, and what we see is optimal for mental health is a longer chain. So algae oil is unique in terms of the only type of plant that actually has those longer chain omega-3. So definitely worth investigating that. And I do talk about a few other supplements or nutrients that are worth like really focusing on to making sure you're really giving the body that maximal chance, because we've got a lot of omega-3s in the brain, so we need to make sure that is well supplied for our mental health. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that gut brain axis, some people, I don't know if you want me to go into it now, but people are a bit skeptical. They're like, well, just wait, your brain's kind of in the skull and your bacteria in a very different part of your body. How are they really communicating? And there is essentially 3 key ways or pathways. So anyone who likes these mechanisms, shall I share them, Chuck?
Oh, by all means, you're on a roll. I'm not going to stop you.
Sometimes some people love knowing the science. Other people are like, look, I just want to know what works.
Nerd out.
If you don't want the science, tune out for the next 1 minute. So essentially the 3 pathways. One is kind of like a mobile phone, where the microbes actually sense something's going on, and they activate this mobile phone up what we call the vagus nerve into the brain and tell the brain that something's going on. So that's the first one, mobile phone. Second one is via the postal service, essentially, where the bacteria actually produce chemicals and that gets into our blood. Some of them can pass that blood-brain barrier and talk to our brain that way. And then the third one is via the immune system, kind of like an alarm system. And that's because 70% of our immune system lives in the gut. So when the microbes sense something's going on, they activate the immune system. The immune system produces inflammatory markers, and that also alerts the brain. So it's really those 3 ways, the mechanisms of why we're starting to see targeting the gut for mental health, can have these really real and measurable impacts.
See, that's just it. See, it's that connection. It's super, super, super strong. I want to go back to what it was you were saying about supplements. There is a good portion of the audience, in full disclosure, who would prefer to get all of their sources through food. So if somebody was interested in not necessarily going that supplemental route with the algae oil, as you were talking about, what are some foods where they could get those omega-3s, those longer chain ones that you were talking about?
Yeah, well, we know the best source is oily fish. So, if you choose not to eat oily fish, you can get some types of the omega-3 from things like the walnuts, the chia seeds, and the tofu, but you have to make quite a concerted effort to get them in. We're now starting to see that there are some plant-based milks fortified with plant-based omega-3, so you might be able to get some in there as well. But it actually is quite a challenge to get in sufficient amounts. But I'm all for, food first and not supplements. That's definitely my philosophy as well. But it just can be, if you're 100% plant-based, quite tricky just getting it in from plants, unless you want to eat, 300 grams of tofu every day and, a quarter of a cup of chia seeds and 50 grams of walnuts, which might get a bit boring every day.
As a lot of walnuts. But it's funny, the tofu, I was just talking to a bodybuilder, a vegan bodybuilder who I used to work with by the name of Melissa Busta. She's a fan of yours, by the way. She was excited when I said that you were going to be on the show. But she was talking about just this insane amount of tofu that she would eat getting ready for competition. So I'm pretty sure she was hitting her mark.
She was
there,
hitting
no
that.
doubt. Yeah.
She's getting her omega-3s in. Love it. And then also, tofu is a great source of those phytoestrogens as well, which I think there was quite a lot of myths thrown into the water about that causing breast cancer, or if you had breast cancer, making it worse. But actually, the studies have just been completely misinterpreted. They were based on animal studies, which we know very rarely translate to humans. And now we've got really robust evidence showing that things like soy products, the tofu, soybeans, actually are linked with a reduction in your risk of breast cancer, as well as a relapse if you've already had breast cancer.
Absolutely. Again, it's all like fascinating stuff. We're going to do our Let's Beat Breast Cancer campaign again this October. And we have Dr. Christy Funk come on, and the science that she spills about all of this and how important your diet and lifestyle are in mitigating your risk for breast cancer. It's just astounding. The number of cases that she says are preventable. So speaking of preventing things, in order to prevent becoming sick, you need to have a really, really, really strong immune system. I can't let you go without talking about that gut immune access. How important is a healthy gut to having a healthy immune system?
Yeah, look, they go hand in hand. Like I highlighted, 70% of our immune system lives in our gut. And, we certainly see it all the time, not only in my clinical practice, but also the research that backs it up, that people who've got a healthier gut and therefore a gut microbiome have more resilient immune systems. And it's played out with COVID-19 as well, where, people who had better gut health, if they did get COVID-19, they were much less likely to become unwell with it. So be asymptomatic. And again, I've seen it with a lot of my clients and even my own family, where we all had COVID, but we actually didn't know that we had it. We see that nourishing those gut microbes, because they are producing the chemicals which we know strengthen that immune system and help the immune system actually have really good regulation. In fact, we know any parents out there, the first 1,000 days of a baby's life is really, really important for their immune to develop right. And that is actually taught, that development is taught by our gut microbes, where the microbes teach our immune system what to react to and what it shouldn't react to. And actually, we're thinking the back of this hygiene hypothesis. I think a lot of people have heard that we're being too clean, and therefore reducing down the exposure of our kids to microbes and different microbes has resulted in them having a more or a less diverse microbiota, and therefore their immune system hasn't been trained very efficiently. As a result, high risk of food allergies and other allergies and things like asthma, etc. So it is actually quite important those first 1,000 days of life, and to try expose bub in a safe way to healthy microbes as possible. So I've got a little boy, he's 16 months, and we really work. Well, we've got a puppy, which helps. Actually, the science has shown that kids who grow up with a puppy are much lower risk of getting things like food allergies as well as asthma. As well as being obese in older years. So it's quite interesting research coming out where the obviously having a dog, the babies typically get exposed to more microbes that way. Obviously things like breastfeeding, where you can, I know firsthand it's really challenging, but it does contain not only prebiotics, which feed the gut bacteria like a fertilizer, but also a range of different probiotics, which help the bub's gut to kind of grow and evolve and become really diverse to teach their immune system. And I mean, I could go on, but I won't.
No, I'm wondering though, because I don't think that for a lot of new mothers, that's necessarily something that they're taught, they're aware of, or anything like that. So, if you have grown up and you kind of have this suboptimal immune system, by changing your diet and really kind of eliminating those foods like we were talking about, the processed meat, you change your diet. How much can you still improve your immune system if you didn't have those really well developed immune responses in those first 1,000 days of life?
Yeah, look, you can absolutely have measurable impacts on your immune strength via, changing your diet. And, don't forget those other three pillars that we spoke about, also really important for our gut and therefore immune health. But, I'm not going to lie and say you can get as good immune, regulation if you'd had kind of that exposure younger, because it's kind of programmed in. But I still want people to, feel empowered and know that you can still, improve your immune system by several fold via, even if you haven't had that sort of upbringing, via diet and lifestyle, as adults. But yeah, we do think that programming, particularly things like eczema, for example, does happen when we're young.
I'm curious about dairy and what role that may play in suppressing the immune system. What do you know about that? Is that as villainous as meat?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting topic, and I think fermented dairy, where the microorganisms have actually broken down some of the milk sugars and produced organic acids. Actually, there is some studies to suggest that might have some health benefits to it. In terms of dairy, like skim milk, actually that has been in some studies associated with things like more acne. So, not great for the skin and stuff like that. So, if anyone out there is consuming dairy, because it's always everyone's, personal choice, I would say try have your fermented dairy. Because we think that some of them contain the organic acids, like kefir, for example.
And last question here, and I'll let you run because I'm sure you've got like 18 million other things to do releasing this book. What do we know about somebody who is completely 100% eating a plant-based diet, how their immune system, how their gut health is compared to somebody who's vegetarian and is still eating things like dairy, still eating things like eggs? Do the completely plant-based group, does that group have a leg up on vegetarian?
It's an interesting one. And I think what we're finding actually in these studies, it comes down to actually what type of vegan and what type of vegetarian they are. Because, I talk about this in the book where there's this healthy plant-based dietary index, which is used in a lot of our clinical trials to kind of categorize what a healthy plant is and unhealthy plant is. And they've actually shown that just eating more plants, if they're ultra processed, actually increases your risk of chronic conditions, just like processed animal foods, for example. So actually, what the key predictor is having the whole versions of food. So I'm talking about the whole grains, not the white bread. Having sweetening your food, which I've done in all the books, sweetening them with whole fruit like bananas and dates, and not adding refined sugars. Even like coconut sugar is still a refined sugar. It doesn't have fiber that helps kind of that blood sugar regulation. So actually it's, and I actually give a case study of someone in the book who was vegan. And she had a very junk food diet, like potato chips, pizza, all vegan foods, no animal, but it wasn't the right source. So what we did is change the types of vegan foods that she was having. Her skin cleared up, she got her weight to a happy weight, mental health improved, and all that sort of stuff. So I think the key principle is whole plants. Don't fall victim to this kind of vegan junk food diet.
Yeah, and how concerned are you with we are seeing this explosion of vegan options, but a lot of them absolutely do not qualify as health food whatsoever. There are a lot of the ultra processed foods you were talking about. How concerned are you as our diets, the consumer trends shift over toward plant-based, that it's not going to be the healthiest plant-based diet, and maybe then the benefits of the health benefits of a plant-based diet, that messaging will be lost because people are still eating those ultra processed foods, even though they are vegan.
Yeah, very much so. And it kind of does a disservice to plants, right? Because then people go vegan, but with this junk food, and they go, oh, I don't feel better. Actually, I'm putting on weight, or my skin's bad. My mental health's not in a good place. My hormones are all over the place. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not because you're getting the full beauty and benefit of plants. And then actually, one of the research studies we're currently doing at King's is looking at the potentially negative impact of certain types of foods certain types of additives that are actually found in like 30% of foods, a lot of them which are plant-based alternatives, like a lot of these plant-based alternate milks, for example. You know, we are finding that sometimes when we're substituting bits, the additives chucked in are huge. And although a lot of the additives have been generally regarded as safe, they were tested pre our understanding of our gut microbiome. So that's actually what we're redoing, retesting the safety, a lot of them based on a microbe. And like I highlighted, there's some pilot studies, and we're doing the first, really large clinical trial on it, looking at a category called food emulsifiers. So things like carboxymethyl cellulose, carrageenan, P80, etc.
I'm going to keep my eye out for that study. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Yeah, let me know how that one is progressing. I would love to have you back to talk more about that one. But right now, I would encourage everybody to click the link in the episode notes or in the show description. Go out to your local book retailer, pick up How to Eat More Plants. I mean, we're talking about just getting to 30 every single week, and as we've heard here today, it's not really all that difficult. Dr. Megan Rossi, thank you so very much for your time. I am just enthralled with your passion and your enthusiasm and your knowledge. This has been an absolute treat for me.
It's been an absolute pleasure just to, spread the message. But it sounds like your listeners are very educated. It's just about those practical elements, isn't it? And getting really excited that you can take control of your life and how you feel inside and out.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.